Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today's video is week 3 of the Shattered Scraps Quilt Along. If you don't know what that is, there have been 2 previous videos and I'll put the links to that in the video description, but it's basically a scrap friendly quilt along, and the pattern we're using is not only scrap friendly but it's also like creativity friendly, and it's about kind of making a quilt that's really unique to whatever scraps you have. So the plan for today's video is I'm going to show you my progress in making the blocks for the 2 versions of the quilt that I'm doing. So I'm doing this rainbow version you can kind of see a bit of on screen now, and then I'm doing a purple one for my mother-in-law that's got 4 different shades of purple in it. So I've been working on them both at the same time, so I'll show you how I've been getting on with those. Then I'm going to talk about kind of border options, because I'm going to add a border to one and not to the other. So I thought I would just give you guys some other ideas in case you want to make your quilt tops slightly larger, or you just like borders and you want some new ideas. And then I'm going to do a little look forward to how we can be finishing off our quilts. So I'm definitely doing this rainbow version on the long arm, but I'm undecided at the current moment about whether the purple one is going to be put together as a full quilt top and done on the long arm, or whether I'm going to join it in sections, quilt as you go. So you can absolutely do that with this quilt if that's the kind of thing you like. If I do quilt as you go, I'll be doing the kind of join and flip method that I've shown on the channel before. So I'll link to that in the description as well, but I'll also talk about it later in this video. So I showed you guys this mock-up before of the rainbow version, and then how I transposed it onto the coloring page from the pattern to keep myself straight in terms of which colors went where. And this is the version that I was working on when I did the FPP tutorial last week, so last week's video. And I was putting together the blocks sort of one at a time. So this quilt, it's a repeating block, but it's made up of these 4 quarters that you can kind of mix around. And so I was making one block at a time, ticking those off. And that was how I was going to do the whole quilt. And then I thought about the low volume whites, which was what I was trying to use up for this quilt. And I decided that I wanted to make sure that I was spreading those scraps around, if you know what I mean. Like, so having a bit of each of the low volume fabrics in different bits of the quilt. And I thought if I did it block by block, I might have them all bunched in one corner, which would be a look as well. But anyway, I decided to pivot and make all the quarters and then distribute the whites around and make the blocks after the fact for this one. I got all the quarter blocks done for the rainbow version, ticked them off my coloring sheet, and then I decided to park that one and start working on the purple one. So I'll come back to the rainbow one a bit later, but I moved on and started making my purple blocks then. Now what you're going to see in the next section of the video is me stressing about different shades of purple. But I stand by what I said in previous videos, that you can use all sorts of versions of the same color and put them together, whatever scraps you have, and it's going to look good. What you're seeing is a bit of mother-in-law angst, because this quilt is for my mother-in-law. It was a special request. I want to make sure she likes it. So that is where the kind of faffing is coming from. There's your disclosure. I'll continue on with the story of my quilt top. Missed the previous video. Basically my mother-in-law asked me to make a quilt for her purple bedroom, and she named 4 shades of purple, so purple, mauve, heather, lavender, and then I had her just look through some quilting magazines and show me some quilts that she liked the look of, and so she kind of earmarked them, and then I just tried to kind of capture the essence of what it looked like she liked in those magazines in the Shattered Scraps quilt pattern, and this is what I came up with in terms of a purple that went from one shade down to the next. Full disclosure, unless it is in a rainbow kind of a context, purple is not a color I gravitate towards in quilting. So I actually did struggle with this one a little more than you might have thought. So this is where I've got to with the purple. This one would be this one, and this is meant to be, so this is meant to be purple, mauve, lavender, heather, the other way around. What did I put in the key? Yeah, lavender and then heather. So this one is meant to be mauve. So that would be this 3. And this one would be 2. And it's fine. But I've worked out after I thought I'd sorted the colors that I've got what looks like 2 very different types of mauve. So this obviously looked like mauve. And then this also looked like mauve. But it's not working for me. And then Also, I looked back at some of the pictures from the magazines that my mother-in-law had pointed out, and they were a lot of solid fabrics. And I'm not sure that all of these patterned ones, even in the blocks that I like, are doing what I want. So I'm thinking I'm going to keep this one as the plain purple. I might do a tiny bit of seam ripping and just take out these two. I don't mind this spacey one, I don't think, but I'll think about it. I might replace that one too. But I'm thinking I should leave the solids and the grunge and maybe take out the patterns. And I feel like this one maybe just doesn't work very much at all. And I have to work out which mauve I'm talking about. Is it this or is it this? And then see what I have in that. So that's where I'm going to go with the purple. So after having already done my color sort into those 4 purples in the first video, I decided to redo it and take out all the patterns and kind of tighten down a little bit what went in each color category. It didn't totally work. I'll show you in a minute, especially for the mauve, but I was happier with the groupings of fabric after I did it the second time. So it was all kind of solids and super subtle tone on tone. And I think that's going to look more modern, more like most of the quilts that she was pointing out in the magazines that I gave her. I think with all the patterns, it was just looking a bit too busy, and it was harder to see the difference between the purples. So hopefully this is going to be more what she had in mind. So as I said, I struggled with the mauve section. It became more of a sort of mid-purple mix, but this is all about making do with what I had, so I just decided to go with it and see how it looked. So with my new color groupings, I started making the first few blocks, and I was definitely liking it much more than I was before, so I decided to keep going with that. So I'm at the point now with this one where I'm trying to fill in some of these ones that are going to be like these transitional corners between the sort of color blocks, if you want to call them that, like here, where these two are from this group of colors and then the rest is from the one that's over here. And I'm missing the fabric for this. So what I've got left in this group, that's like here, where I need to just put just a teeny bit in the corner just to make it not so like blocky. Some of them are transitioned with the block like here, and that's fine, but I would like to have a few more like little corner bits. But what I've got left for that color is this, which is not very much. So I'm going to be piecing some. I might have another look through this, the purple crumbs, see if there's anything else there. And then if I really think I need it, although I'd really rather not do this, I could take apart some of these because they've got some of the colors that I need, and I'm not using this block. This is one of the ones I abandoned, so that's an option. So I'm going to have a think. Now that I'm looking at it, that might be the easiest thing rather than piecing out those little bits. Okay. So in the end, I did a bit of both. I did go ahead and rip this block apart and harvest it for parts. And then I also did some crumb piecing to make that fabric stretch so I could complete all the blocks I needed. And actually for all 4 of the purples, I've been doing a little bit of crumb piecing throughout the quilt just to add a little bit of extra interest in some of the patches, and also obviously to make the fabric stretch a bit further. So there's various spots where one patch has been filled with like a little bit of a crumb piece that I made as I was trimming and going along making the rest of the blocks. And I kind of like the added interest that they bring. And I did some of it in the rainbow quilt too. So the low volume background in this quarter block for that quilt, the one with the leaves, is actually 2 charm pack squares sewn together, and then I cut the patch out of that. And then the one with the eyeglasses is got 2 other sort of scraps either side of it, and that whole section in the pattern is just one patch. So depending on the size of scraps I had and how much variety I wanted in that particular quarter block, I did do some crumb piecing before my FPP. So I continued on, made all my blocks, and laid them out on the floor to see what they look like together. I was happy with most of it. The mauve section, not gonna lie, not my favorite. To my eye, it's a little bit purple messy. There's probably at least 1 or 2 fabrics in there that aren't strictly mauve. So mauve's not my wheelhouse. But I definitely think it looks better than when it had the patterned fabric. and I wasn't going to be going out and buying more mauve just for that section. That's not what this is about. That's not really what I'm about. And I kind of like that although we're all following the same pattern, even if you decided you were going to do exactly like I do and do 4 different purple colors and you followed the mock-up that I had on the screen from the first week, there's no way you're going to end up with the same thing because you don't have my scraps. You didn't mix up those purples and you wouldn't have done the same little crumb piecing. So I like how we can all be making this together and come up with something kind of unique. And every single one of our quilts is going to be one of a kind, which was what I said in the first week was my goal for this. So I'm hoping my mother-in-law won't mind the messy purple section and she'll see the work that's gone into it. I think she will. And so I'm moving on now to put together the rainbow quilt top and also start thinking about how I'm gonna finish off both versions. So right now I've got the purple one pieced in rows because if I do it quilt as you go, that's what I need. I need my rows or my sections first. So I've got 5 rows pieced together, all joined together. And then I'll decide whether I'm going to just construct it that way or put it all together in a quilt top and do it on the long arm. So I will show you the finished rainbow quilt top and then I'm gonna talk to you about borders and then I'll decide what I'm doing with this. So as you can kind of see from this sped up footage, I like to construct my quilt tops generally when it's not a quilt as you go situation where I need it in rows. I prefer to do just little sections like blocks of 3 or do the middle first and then join those to each other so that I don't have as many long seams. Obviously this is a repeating block quilt, so I could just be making 4 rows here and then joining the rows all together, but then I'd have 4 long seams and I'd rather have slightly shorter seams and just do them in a different order. So that's the way I choose to generally construct my quilt tops. And I mention that just because if you're a beginner, you might see somebody doing it the sort of row by row way and think that's the only way. And if you're finding it frustrating or you just don't like those long seams like I don't, I just wanted to put the idea in your head that you can kind of do it however you want to do it. And that's kind of a discussion that we were having at the Shattered Scraps question and answer session inside Scrap Club last week. So that was the live Zoom where I was just answering questions about the quilt along for folk who are doing it with me. And there was all sorts of examples of people doing this quilt slightly differently. So last week I showed you the FPP tutorial and the improv tutorial. So there was folk doing both of those methods, but then there was folk putting their own spin on it. So there's a woman in my scrap club called Sophia. She's added these little black strips to make the block kind of like a stained glass effect. It's really cool. And she was kind of explaining to us how she did that. And then there's other members who are doing the improv kind of as a stack and whack because it was faster for them. So just all sorts of creativity. And that's what I love about quilting and about quilt-alongs like this, where you just can make the quilt entirely your own and see how different people play with these ideas. And that's kind of the fun we're having inside Scrap Club. So it was a really fun session. And I've just been enjoying seeing how everybody's quilt tops are forming. Anyway, here is my rainbow quilt. I love how the quilt top turned out. Obviously, I still have to quilt it, but I'm really pleased. And this one felt much more straightforward to me to put together than the purple one that kind of confused my head a bit. So in the spirit of us all making this quilt our own way, it's time for a little border brainstorming. Now, I don't personally use borders every time I make a quilt, but they can be useful for size and sometimes for framing. So if you like them, I wanted to give you some options. First of all, I'm going to talk about the kind of border with the long strips that you're probably used to seeing, but there is more than one way to get to the same place for even that kind of a standard looking border. So one way to start is to cut 2 strips that are as long as your quilt is wide and make those strips however wide you want that border plus your 1/4 inch seam allowance and attach those strips to the top and bottom of your quilt top. Then measure your quilt top with that top and bottom border on, and then you can cut 2 strips and add them onto the side to finish your border. And of course, you can get to pretty much exactly the same way by doing it the opposite way. Make your first 2 strips the same as the length of the side of your quilt, add those, and then get your 2 long strips to match the new width of your quilt, top and bottom. Or you could do it log cabin style. So start at the top, then add the side, then the bottom, and then the other side. So each time you're measuring that new width or length of the quilt to get the length of your next strip. Now I do it that way, measuring what size I need next because I'm not a planner. But if you want to make sure you've got enough fabric for your entire border, obviously you can do all this measuring and quilt math on a piece of paper ahead of time, but don't forget your 1/4 inch seam allowances. And of course, your borders don't all have to be the same width as each other. So the baby quilt version of the Shattered Scraps quilt makes a square quilt, but some people like a rectangle. So I did include a border option for that one where the side borders are skinnier than the top and bottom borders. So you get that rectangle in the end. Although my purple quilt is already a rectangle because of the amount of rows I've used, I am still going to be adding a border in order to get it to the size that my mother-in-law has requested for her bed. The border's not going to look exactly like this. I'll come back to the purple one in a second, but they will have uneven widths of borders. Here's that square baby quilt I was talking about, and I want to throw another border option at you. It's one that I use fairly frequently because, again, I don't love those long seams, whether it's a border or putting a quilt top together. So another option that I use fairly frequently when I do choose to do a border is to kind of partially border the blocks before I've even constructed the quilt top. So I would add a section to the left or to the right of the quilt blocks that are going to be on the outer edges of the quilt, and then to the top and the bottom of the ones on the corner, or the top and the bottom of the ones in the middle at the top. Hopefully you can see from the picture what I'm talking about here, but I'm gonna do something similar to this for my purple one, so I'll explain with that as well. So this was my first mock-up with the sort of skinny borders on the side and then the thicker borders on the top and the bottom for the purple one. But what I'm actually going to do, because I've already got it pieced into rows, is just add little sections to the left and the right of the rows that I haven't put together yet, and that is going to be the skinny border on either side. As you can see from the picture, what I'm hoping to do is kind of follow the color that is on that end of the row and make the border a similar color. So it can follow that same gradation sort of pattern. Because of the scraps I have left, these are unlikely to be solid strips. They're probably going to be pieced as well. For the top and bottom, I'm going to add those after, and I'm going to try and do something similar. But my issue is going to be that I really don't have that much mauve. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that one section at the top that should be that mauve color. So I might have to just wing it and use whatever purple I have left for that bit of the top border. So my measurements are going to be on either side of the rows, going to be 1.5 inch by 14.5 inch. And for the top, it's going to be 58 inch by 4.5 inch. And that is going to get me to the size that my mother-in-law is looking for, which is 58 by 78 inches. What about the rainbow version? Well, I did have a play just to see what it would look like if I added an extra row, top and sides of just some quarter blocks in a low volume. I think it's too much. And then I also had a silly play with skinny strips of each of the rainbow colors around it. Honestly, I don't think this quilt needs a border. I like the size. I like a square quilt, so I'm going to leave this one with no border. I think the low volume in the quilt top itself gives enough framing. I don't think I need anything else. So this one is going to go straight to being quilted. So I'm going to show you how I get on with my purple border next week. And I have, spoiler alert, decided that I am going to do the purple quilt as you go. There's a few reasons why, and I'll talk about those next week too, because this video is getting long enough as it is. But I do just want to mention one thing before I sign off today, because I'm sure you guys are going to ask, when do you take the papers out if you're doing it foundation paper piecing? So for me, and people are going to have different opinions on this, and that's fine. You can do it different ways. But for me, I took the papers out of the finished rainbow quilt top last night while I was watching TV. Wasn't too taxing because I was just watching TV anyway. And for the purple one, I'm going to wait until I've put those border strips on the side, I think. I did start taking the papers out of one, and then I was like, might be easier if I just leave the papers on. Just for stability, there's not really, but really it's fine, because obviously you could piece this improv or stack and whack or whatever, and you wouldn't have the papers. So I think it's just a comfort thing for me. I like having the papers on, but don't stress if you've taken them off or you haven't. There's no strict wrong here, okay? So just do it however you want to do it. If you are doing the quilt along with me, what should you be doing this week? Well, just keep going with your blocks. I'm obviously a little bit ahead because it's my quilt along and I need to show you the next thing. So don't get stressed if you don't have a quilt top ready yet. I don't think there's that many people. There's a few folk in the scrap club who are kind of whizzing away, but I don't think anyone's got a full quilt top done yet. So you're not behind. So just keep making your blocks. If you are one of those whizzy fast people, then you can start thinking about the borders, and then we'll meet up again next week here and I will talk to you about how I'm doing the Quilt As You Go version, how I'm doing the long arm version, and I'm hoping I'll have some other photos to share with you from members of my scrap club of how they are making their quilt blocks, because we've been seeing loads of those photos coming up inside the group, and so I'm going to just ask if anyone wants to share them and see if I can include them in next week's video. So I hope you're enjoying the quilt along as much as I am. Thanks so much for spending time with me today, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!